Welcome back to our programming Windows Forms application tutorial. This is we're still on lesson 3. This is part 6 of the travel allowance calculator application we're trying to create. So this video number 6. So I'll just open up Visual Studio and take us to our program. So this is what we have so far. We were able to create a file stream and a stream reader that read the file stream, um, and we were able to read all the contents of a particular file that we have in our that separated from our program. So the file is not going to be within, like, the contents of the file is kind of extracted from being part of the contents of our source code. Okay, so I remember I gave a brief explanation of why we would like to do that. So in this video we're going to continue in creating the program. So far what we've done is we were able to read the file. So let me just run this to remind me of where we stopped. Oh, okay. So here in the output window, we can see that we after reading the file, we just output it out to the output window. So we are sure that the file was read correctly. So the next thing I said we were going to do is we're going to start breaking this into chunks, into smaller chunks. So each, like 656 here, should be a single integer. Maybe we shouldn't use integers, we should use floating point numbers. Okay. Also, that also reminds me, I think when we were writing the program, when we created that two-dimensional array where we were going to be storing the data, that's the distances in kilometers, we created it as a string. That's, if I can find it, I think we did it at the top. Okay, so here we created it as a list of string. Okay, if you remember, a distance is like a number. Okay, so a string is probably not the best type of data type we should use to store distances. So because of that, I'll just change that. So make sure you change that. We're going to change it in it rather than have a string. Actually, we could have, for this particular text file, if you look at the Nigerian cities.txt, if you look at the contents, everything, all the distances are in whole numbers. Okay, so they were kind of rounded up to whole numbers. So for something like this, you can actually use integers. Okay, but to be more practical, if it could be that in your own application that you're creating, there is a higher accuracy of the figures. So it might give the numbers in floating point, or double, maybe floating point. Okay, so yeah, so what I mean by floating point is fractional number. So you could have something like 1107.24 kilometers. Okay, so that's more practical for a distance. So because of that, I'm going to create, when we go to create, let me just close this. When we go to create the distances, rather than create it as an int, that's int for integers, I'll create it as a list of floats. So floating point numbers, that's the two-dimensional array is going to hold floating point numbers. Okay, so I'll just change that to float, and I'll do Control S to save, and that's it. Okay, so it's fine now. So let's go back to where we were creating. So I'll just remove this line. Remember, this line is just to output the content, so that we'll make sure that we're actually reading the text file correctly. So I'll remove that. Rather than write it out, what we're going to do is we're going to break each line. So we're going to assume this is the first line, and the line, remember we stored it inside this line as a string. Now I'll show you how to break a full string into smaller chunks. Okay, now usually when you break a full string into smaller chunks, the result is actually given back to you as an array. Okay, it's given back to you as an array of strings. Okay, anyway, let's just go ahead and write the code. I think and then we'll explain it later. So because we know it's going to come out as an array of strings, so we're going to just create the variable that will hold it. Okay, so we're going to say chunks is equal to, by the way, this is just a variable name, you can call it whatever you like. Okay, also notice I'm creating it as an array of string. Okay, so chunks equals line dot split. So it's the split method that you use to break a full string into smaller chunks. And usually, if you look at the description in the IntelliSense explanation for this split method, you'll see how to use it. So there are actually 6 overloads. The one I'm looking for is the one that will take split car separator. No, not this one. Okay, I want something like this, but not with the with a car, not with a string of characters as the separator. So I'll just press down again till I see. Okay, so this is the one I want. I want to split it by an array of strings, and then the string split options. Now the string split options is just an enumeration, and it lists out kind of like the way you want to split it. So if, for example, you say you should split it without leaving any empty entries, okay, you'll see the enumeration, the name of the enumeration in there. If you say you should split it without any empty entries, that means that if you split the string and it happens that some of the contents of the chunks are actually empty string, then it's going to throw away those empty strings. Now, what I mean by that is, let me just take you back to our Nigerian cities distances here. So imagine if I had, you see, we have a comma here, right? And remember, we're going to split it by the commas. If we had another comma here, so we have 2 commas, and we tell it to split by commas, now that is going to cause an empty string to appear somewhere here. Okay, because there's a comma here, it's going to split, and then there's another comma here, it's going to split, and then in here it expects a content as a chunk, but you can see that there's nothing there, so the chunk is going to be an empty string. Okay, now if you use the that use no empty entries string split option, that is going to cause this empty string to be disregarded. So this would still work if we run it into our code. Okay, so I'll just remove that, and okay, I just saved again to make sure. Let me go back to the code view, and then we finish up our, okay, I've forgotten the, bring it back up. So dot split. Okay, so first we have to give it, I always forget the way to do this. I think something like this, and then in here you're going to use the comma or the character that you wish. Okay, it should be something like new string. Okay, and then you use a comma. Okay, I'll explain what I'm doing here. I know this is a bit weird, but I'll try and explain it for you. Okay, all you need to know is that, first of all, you're not going to use a single string to like, if you look at, let me just bring it back up. If you look at the explanation, it's not expecting a single string. Okay, now that is why we cannot do something like this. We cannot just say split it by a string, that's this a comma, as our argument, and then say string split options dot remove empty entries. Okay. Okay, so you can see, by the way, you can see that string split options, like I said, it's an enumeration. You put the dot, you'll see all the options. So there are actually two options: remove empty entries and none. Okay, so what we want is we want to use the remove empty entries. Now this will not work because um it's not expecting a single string as the separator. Okay, it is actually expecting an array of strings as the separator. Now that is why in my code I always use this code, new string. So I create a new array of strings, and then I shove inside it only a single. So there will be only one cell in the array, and that cell is going to take the separator that I want. Okay, so this is the separator, the comma. Okay, now this is going to work because this is actually an array, but the array has only one single character inside. That's one element inside, and it's just the comma. You can see I put the comma in quotation marks. Okay, so this is telling the method that this is the character you should use to break that big line. Okay, so anywhere it finds a comma in that line, it's going to eliminate the comma first, and then it's going to break off that string and take whatever is on the left side of what it has just broken into a new element of the array that is going to return, which is this chunks. I hope that makes sense. Okay, so I'll just go ahead and continue with the code. So this is going to cause oh, string. Okay, yeah, this is going to cause, remember this is done for each line. So for each line, this is going to return all the items. So by the time it runs, when it gets into this while loop, by the time it runs this first line, what's going to happen is that in here, all these from this 656 up to 954, they will all be broken down, and they will all be placed into that chunks array. And in the chunks array, chunks 0, that's cell 0, is going to contain 656. Okay, chunk 1 is going to contain 477. Chunk 2 is going to contain 566. However, those items that it's placing inside those cells are actually characters. Okay, they are strings. Okay, they are just strings. They are just 656 string. Okay, so we're not done yet. We still need to convert that string back into floating point numbers, because it's floating point numbers. We want to store the distances as floating point numbers. Okay, so let's go back to our code view. That's here, I guess. Yes. Okay, and in here, so what we need to do before we go to the next line, we need to take this chunks and make sure we shove it into this first cell. That's the first cell. That's the first cell for let me see, the first cell for the distances. Remember, the distances array is an array of arrays. Okay, now in the first dimension, the first cell. Okay, okay, I hope this is not going to confuse you. In the first dimension, the first cell, everything here, everything in these chunks is going to be placed into the first cell. And you remember the chunks is actually an array, so that makes sense, right? You're going to take an array and put it inside the first cell of this array of arrays. Okay, so that makes sense. So it means in the first cell of this array, we have an array, which is chunks. However, remember I said this is an array of float. Okay, is a two-dimensional array of floating point numbers. meaning that we cannot just take chunks as it is and just shove it in there. We have to first convert the chunks into a floating point number. Okay, remember how to convert a string into a floating point number. So we'll just go ahead and do that now. So also remember, we already have our counter here, k. The reason we need this counter is because out here we're using a while loop, whereas in here we're going to need to iterate over the elements of these chunks. Okay, so I'm going to say int oh yeah, we're still using k, but it's going to start from 0. Okay, so the first element is going to be element 0. Okay, remember the other time we used 1 because we wanted to just output the result. Okay, we didn't want to do anything meaningful in our code. We just wanted to output the result. However, now what we're trying to do is we want to take these chunks and shove it into our array. Okay, our array of distances. Okay, all right. Let me see. So here we're going to say distances distances k. Okay, that's this k here. The reason we're using k is because we're going to loop this in here. We're still going to create a loop. And anyway, let's just finish the code and you'll see what I mean. So distances k is equal to so first, okay, before we do this, let's just go back up. First, I think the first thing we should do is we should create an array of floats. So we're going to create, and the kind of array we're going to create is a list of float. The reason is because distances take list of lists. So we just want to take this and shove it into distances. So list of float is equal to new list. Oh, we didn't give it a name. That's the name of variable. We're going to call it chunks float. Chunks in float. I don't know if that makes sense. Chunks in float. So that's it's still the same chunks array, but here we have it in a floating point format. Okay, so chunks in float is equal to new list float, and don't forget your brackets. Okay, then next what we're going to do is we're going to take each item in this chunks and make sure we convert it to a floating point number before we feed it into here. So we're going to say for each string s in, that's for each item inside this chunks, that's for each those numbers that we've broken down. But remember, the numbers are in string format, so we're using I'm sure you will, if you look at explanation in our earlier tutorials where we treated for each loop, this shouldn't be something new to you. Okay, so for each s in chunks, we're going to say chunks in float dot add. So what we're going to add is not s. Remember, if you try to even add s, it's not going to work because this s is a string while chunks in float is a floating point number, right? You can see it's giving us a red line. So you have to first convert s dot pass sorry, if you want to pass to a floating point number, okay, so it's float dot pass, I believe, float dot pass, and we give our s in there. Okay, so you can see now this works. So what we're doing is we're taking each item in these chunks, we convert it to a floating point number, and then we store it inside these chunks in float. Okay, now by the time this for each loop, remember this is going to repeat as many times as the number of items that are inside these chunks. Okay, the moment it reaches the last item and it has converted and stored it inside chunks and float, then at this point this exits the loop. Okay, so from here onwards, we're not going to be concerned with this chunks array anymore. What we'll be interested in is chunks and float, because we have already converted this from strings to floats. Okay, and it's the floating point numbers we're interested in. So here, after that, we're going to say distances k is equal to chunks in float. And that's it. Okay, so we just take that array. I don't know if this is making sense to you now. Remember, this is an array of floats. Okay, and remember our distances is a array of floats. Okay, like a list of floats. Okay, so we just take that chunks in float, that array that contains all the items, that's all the numbers. Okay, and remember, they are now in numbers, they are now in numeric form. It contains all the numbers, and then we just store it inside the first cell. Now I'm calling it the first cell because this, at this point, k is 0. And also notice this while loop, because we're going to keep looping. The first time k will be 0, but the next time is going to go in. Remember, we're adding k here, so the next time is going to go into the iteration. K is going to be 1, so it's going to store it in the second line. Also notice that when it's going for the second time, it is actually going to read the second line. Okay, so believe it or not, with doing this, we have actually finished breaking everything. I know we just did it for the first line, isn't it? But because we've already planned our while loop accurately, and we've planned this for each loop accurately, we have actually succeeded in coding out everything, in coding out how to break all those chunks, that for the first, the second line, the third line, up to the last line. Okay, all right. Now what we're going to do, but before that, let me just save file, save all. This is probably a good checkpoint where we should look, check our output window, and see that we've actually done something correctly. That we've actually broken them down and stored them inside the distances correctly. Okay, so to do that, we'll just do some we'll just do some sample tests. So in here, that we believe at this point of the program, all the distances have been stored inside. Okay, so what we're just going to do is we're going to say console, just write out to the console dot write line the distance from okay, from point, let's say okay, let's just say the distance stored in 1 1, that's dimension 1, that's cell 1 in the first dimension, and cell 1 in the second dimension. Okay, I don't know if this makes sense to you, but I'm talking about the dimensions in the array. Okay, so we'll just take a look, take a peek. So actually, cell 1 in the first dimension and cell 1 in the second dimension means, first of all, this is the first cell of the first dimension. That's this whole line. Okay, then second, cell 1, oh sorry, cell 1, this is actually cell 0 of the first dimension, so this is cell 1 of the first dimension. Okay, then the second cell 1 in the second dimension is going to be this. Okay, so we expect to see 340 when we try to print out cell 1 in the first dimension and cell 1 in the second dimension. So what we're going to do is we're going to say console.writeLine. Oh, okay. we'll just add that dollar sign character here so that we'll be able to add is, and then we output distances. And notice how to output how to write the dimensions when you want to access cell 1 in first dimension and cell 1 in second dimension. You use these square brackets twice like this. Okay, look at how I did it. I didn't put 1 comma 1. No, you put 1 in square bracket, then next to it another square bracket 1. Now, okay, I believe this should work, but I'm just wondering what happens if I try it this way. Will it work? Okay, yeah, that would work. Okay, so this is how we're going to do it. So, like I said, we expect to see. Let's just go back to the text file. So we expect to see 340 as the correct item there. If we see 340, sorry about that. If we see 340, then we know we actually read everything and we broke everything down correctly. So let's just click on play to run that. And did we hit? Okay, we hit an error. System argument out of range, index was out of range, must be non-negative and less than. Okay, I think there's a little problem where going over. Let me just see if I can find it. This is k equals chunks in float. Oh, I see. Okay, this makes sense. The reason we're having that is because uh we we have only did we initialize our array, by the way? I Did we do that? Let me check. Did we initialize the array? Yes, we did initialize the array, the distances array. I think I know what's causing it is because uh we've only declared this, but we haven't yet uh distances k. Okay, let me just pause this and try to see if I can find the what's causing the error. Okay, I think I was able to find out the problem. This is the problem actually. We created distances as a list, okay, and here I'm trying to use it as if I created it as a normal array, okay. So that's the issue. Rather than have distances k equals chunks in float, so actually this is redundant. We don't need this. We don't need this k counter. Rather than have that, we'll just use distances dot add. Okay, we'll just use distances dot add chunks in float. The reason is because if we say distance is 0, remember the distances array has only been initialized. There's nothing, it is empty. There's nothing inside. So we can actually access cell 0 because it's not yet existent. So we have to first create or add to that array. Remember when you use the add method to a list, then at this point we now have a distance is 0. Okay, so we have a cell 0. Okay, so that's most likely the problem. If we run it now, so like we said, uh distances 1 should be 3, is it 340? I guess yes, it's 340. So this is a hint that we are actually on the right path, that we actually broke those chunks down correctly. We can just take another random test again. If you check Nigerian, if you check the txt file, so this should be, this 404 should be distances. First of all, this is 0 1 2, so this is 2. Remember, each line is in the first dimension. If you're counting the first dimension, then you take the rows. Okay, so this is row 1, row 0, which means that's the first dimension. row 1 is the second dimension, is row 1 in the first dimension, row 2, this is cell 2 in the first dimension, and then here we have 0 1 2, and then that's 2 2 in the that's 2 in the first dimension, 2 in the second dimension. 404 is 2 in the first dimension and item 2 in the second dimension. Okay, so if we go back to our code, we'll just test that out. We'll say the distance stored in 2 2 is distance is 2 2, and like I said, let's run that and see the output. 404 exactly, so that's correct. So as you can see, I believe everything is correct at this point. We were able to break those we were able to first to read the text file, and then next we were able to break the text file into we were able to break the long lines into smaller tiny chunks of numbers, and now we have the distances all stored inside the distances array. Okay, so I am thinking we should probably stop here and then continue now. Okay, maybe we should just add a little more. Okay, so let's look at what do we need to do in to proceed with our application. We're able to read cities distances, so this method is complete. By the time we call this method, the distances array must have been populated, so this is going to populate the distances array. Now the next thing we're going to do, it's not going to be so obvious, but let me see if I can try and explain. Let's see. Okay, so let's just go back to our design view. I always like going back to the design view to remind me of what we need to do. So usually, like we said, we're going to select a starting point here, select an ending point. Then when we also populate the payment per kilometer, and then when we click on calculate allowance, it's supposed to tell us the distance of the journey and then the payable allowance. So our next goal now is for us to be able to find out the distance. Okay, which particular, remember there are tiny cells inside our distances array. Our next goal is when we populate this start point and end point, we should somehow be able to tell from the start point and end point which particular distance corresponds to that start point and end point. Okay, that's the next step. Good. Now to do that, the first thing we need to know is that, you see, the distances are actually in, like we said, in alphabetical order. Okay, it's also going to help us that already the way we entered the state capitals inside the state capitals array, they are already in alphabetical order. Okay, so now the way we did it is that you can see Abakaliki is element 0 of the state capitals. Abeokuta is element 1. Abuja is element 2. Okay, now that somehow corresponds to the layout or the way we actually laid out the way we stored the distances in the distances array. Remember, the first, now we're only concerned with the first dimension. Forget about the second dimension. In the first dimension of our array, the element 0 is going to contain distances, all the distances of Abakaliki. Okay, so that first cell in the first dimension corresponds to distances of Abakaliki. Okay, so somehow, in a way, all these states can actually be somehow coded into elements or into indices. So, for example, Abakaliki can be represented by index 0. Okay, Abeokuta can be represented by index 1. Abuja can be represented by index 2. Okay, now this is not the only way. Okay, this is not the only way you can actually solve this problem, or you can actually create this program, but this is the way I choose to do it. Okay, so that's the strategy I used in even in the web-based application that I did. So rather than have, when you're giving the states, remember, you will be given the states in string form. Okay, when you get the states in string form, so usually you said you're being told that's from the input which the user is going to come from the user. Remember, we've already even created a method that does that for us, which is the get distance method, this method. So it's actually in here we're supposed to code out. Okay. Okay. I'm beginning to remember some of the things I mentioned in the earlier um, tutorial. That I think in the previous tutorial. Remember, I said this is not optimal because we are actually leaking memory in here. Okay, we did not clean it up, so I believe coding out this method should probably be in the next lesson. Okay, so for this lesson, let's just clean up this method, this particular method, where we read the city's distances, so where we actually read this file. And the way how you're going to clean that, now the reason is because you see this file stream object that we created here, and this stream reader object that we created, these two objects that we created, they are actually what we call iDisposable. They all both of them implement the iDisposable interface. Okay. Now, when an object implements an iDisposable interface, it is expected that when you're done using that object, you should actually call its dispose method, so that it will be erased or wiped off from memory. Okay, now I know this might not really make much sense to you, because like we've been creating objects or since when we started our intro to C sharp. Why didn't we do anything like erasing memory? Why are we worried about it now? Now the reason is because you can see, you will later, maybe later you will find out that all not all objects are actually that the not all objects in C sharp are the what do you call it, the garbage collector is able to manage. Okay, there are some objects in C sharp that the garbage collector cannot manage. Okay, now all the other objects we've been creating, they are all what we call, I think you can call them managed classes, I believe. So if a class is managed, it means when you create objects of that class, the garbage collector can handle disposing of the object for you when you're not using it anymore. Okay, that's when you're done. That's when it, remember the scope, remember scope of, so whatever we declare inside these curly brackets, by the time execution exits from this curly bracket, whatever was declared in here, for example, this list float, chunks in float, is going to be disposed of by your garbage collector. Okay, so now for this file stream object and this stream reader object, the two objects are not going to be disposed of by the garbage collector because they are unmanaged objects. Okay, so because of that, we have to do it ourselves when we're done using them. So I believe we should probably um, eliminate, like we should probably dispose of them here. That's after, when we're done reading the file. Okay, So somewhere here we should call the dispose. I think probably you should probably call the close method first, and then call the dispose method on the object. Okay, but rather than do that, there's a very handy and very simple and short way to actually do that, and I'll show you now. The way you do that um, is by using a using statement. So you type using. Now remember this using statement. This using statement is completely different from the using statement we're using here. Okay, this using statement is saying that whatever object we're creating here, that's what's going to follow. The object that's going to be created next is a managed object, and I want you to automatically dispose of that object the moment we exit the using scope. Okay, so first here we're going to create the using scope. We're going to do something like this, and then this semicolon has to go away, and then what follows next is a curly bracket. Okay, and then because we want the scope to exist up to this point, the closing curly bracket is going to end here. So you can see we wrapped all this code within this using statement. Okay, now by doing that, the moment execution exits from this curly bracket, this file stream object is going to be disposed of automatically. Okay, because of this using statement. Okay, it's going to be called, actually its dispose method is going to be called implicitly. Okay, I think the compiler is going to do it for us. Okay, so it's not as if it's just automatically going to be disposed of. Its dispose method is going to be called, but we don't need to explicitly write it out because we've used this using statement here. Okay, now that is for the file stream. Notice that you have to do the same thing for the stream reader object also. So we type using, and then we put this in brackets. Notice that you wrap whatever you're declaring in brackets, and that means that that statement is not going to end with a semicolon also. Okay, and then you open, so we have two nested using statements. Okay, and then here you use your curly bracket here. So what this means is that you can see this using directive gets in, this file stream object is created. Immediately another using directive comes in, and a stream reader is created. Now when this when execution exits from this curly bracket, the stream reader object is actually disposed of here. Okay, because this, you can see this curly bracket is for this using. Okay, is for this particular directive. So up to this point, our file stream object is still residing in memory. Okay, until when we uh, reach here, and when this curly bracket is exited, then this file stream object is disposed of. Okay, so that's just how to cleanly um, read a text file. Okay, so I almost forgot about that. You might run the program even without this using and see that it runs, but you should just bear in mind that if you don't use the using statement, it means that even after that execution exits from there, your file stream object and your stream reader object are still residing in memory. And if they are holding resources, like if there's any resources they're using on the system, then those resources are also still going to be engulfed. Okay, so what it means is that you'll just be leaking memory. Okay, all right, so I think this is probably a good place to stop this tutorial for now. At least we were able to break the long that's we were able to take this particular file and break each number and store each number inside one gigantic array, which we call the distances array. Okay, so in the next lesson we're going to try and code out this method whose responsibility is to take a start city, like we discussed earlier, take an end city, and then it should return a distance. Okay, by looking at this distances array, it should carry out some permutations and combinations and try to figure out from Kaduna, for example, if the start city is Kaduna and the end city is Abuja, you should be able to calculate and find out what's the distance from Kaduna to Abuja. Using those, if you remember, we said we're going to take each of the cities, we're going to represent them with indices. So Abakaliki will be represented by 0, Abeokuta will be represented by 1, Abuja. I'm beginning to think right from here we should probably use like an enumeration, but it will only complicate things. Okay, there's a very easy way we can fetch out the indices of these, but I'll show you in the next lesson. Okay, so I'll stop this tutorial here and I'll see you in the next one.